the bridge of the iron-bound flagship, the Fist of Aetheris, didn't just vibrate, it screamed, not with the sound of engines, but with the high-pitched electronic wail of 10,000 target locks snapping into place simultaneously. Legate Thorn gripped the command dais, his knuckles white against the dark alloy. Outside the reinforced view screen, the empty void of Sector 0 had vanished. In its place was a wall of flickering light as thousands of cloaked Soul Guard warships shed their invisibility like a serpent shedding skin. They hadn't just been waiting, they had been perfect. It turned out that the primitive Terrans weren't hiding behind their borders because they were afraid of the hegemony. They were waiting for an excuse to show why those borders existed in the first place. 6 hours earlier, the mood and the luminous spires of Aetheris had been one of arrogant dismissal. Thorn had stood before the High Concordat, his cape sweeping the polished floor as he demanded the coordinates for the Forbidden Sector. The elders had sat in their hovering chairs, their eyes darting toward one another in a silent, terrified communication that Thorn mistook for senility. "They are a footnote," Thorn had spat, his voice echoing off the crystalline walls. "A species that breathes nitrogen mix and clings to a single star system. Why does the Concordat treat Sector 0 like a holy site? It is empty space. It is our space." One of the High Counselors, a being whose skin was as translucent as the spires themselves, leaned forward. "We do not protect the Terrans, Legate. We protect the balance. To enter Sector 0 is to step into a cage that was never meant for them." Thorn hadn't listened. In fact, he'd laughed. He saw the hegemony's thousands of dreadnoughts as the pinnacle of evolution. He saw the Ironbound title as a literal promise of invincibility. He ordered the jump into the void, expecting to find a few rusted outposts and a terrified population of scavengers. Instead, the moment the fleet dropped out of warp, the sensors went flatline. No radiation, no heat signatures, just a series of massive, ancient buoys pulsing a rhythmic, low-frequency signal. "Scan them," Thorn ordered, his eyes narrowing as he watched the distant, blinking lights. The tactical officer's hands flew over the interface. "Legate, these aren't communication arrays. They're gravitational anchors, and they've been active for 800 years. 8 centuries of isolation wasn't stagnation." A voice suddenly crackled over every frequency, bypassing the flagship's encrypted firewalls with terrifying ease. It was a human voice, calm, tired, and devoid of the theatrics Thorn expected from a lesser species. "It was a rehearsal for your arrival." The buoys didn't explode, they simply shifted. The stars behind them began to distort, and the empty space began to ripple. One by one, the Terran ships appeared. They didn't look like the jagged, brutalist designs of the hegemony. They were sleek, matte black needles that seemed to swallow the light of the distant suns. They didn't move like ships, they moved like thoughts, sliding into a perfect, suffocating sphere around Thorn's entire armada. The realization hit Thorn like a physical blow to the stomach. The Terrans hadn't been trapped. They had been refining. They had turned the art of war into a science of survival, and the hegemony had just walked straight into the laboratory. "We didn't build the buoys to keep them in," the voice continued, colder now as the first Terran weapons array began to glow with a haunting blue intensity. "We built them to keep you alive." The blue glow from the Terran ships didn't pulse, it hummed, a low-frequency vibration that rattled the fillings in Thorn's teeth and made the deck plates under his boots feel like liquid. He looked at his tactical overlay. It was a digital slaughterhouse. Every single one of his dreadnoughts was bracketed by a dozen black needles, their kinetic batteries already preloaded, with solutions his computers couldn't even calculate. "Evasive maneuvers," Thorn roared, but the command died in his throat. The flagship didn't move. In fact, the entire ironbound fleet was frozen. The Terrans hadn't fired a single shot, yet the hegemony's engines were cold, their thrusters locked behind a wall of localized gravitational interference. It was as if the universe had simply decided the hegemony no longer had permission to move. A graveyard for 300 souls just became the tomb for your entire empire. The human voice returned. There was no anger in it, only a devastatingly flat sense of history. You were warned by the Concordat. You were told the void was a cage. You just didn't realize who the bars were meant for. Then the Terrans moved. It wasn't a battle. It was a dissection. The black needles slipped through the iron-bound formations with a speed that defied inertia. They didn't aim for the hulls. They aimed for the weapon hardpoints, the sensor arrays, and the engine cowlings. White-hot beams of concentrated light lanced out, shearing through the invincible hegemony alloy, as if it were parchment. Thorn watched, paralyzed, as his secondary cruisers were stripped of their teeth in seconds. No explosions, no fire, just the clean, surgical removal of their ability to fight. It was the ultimate humiliation to be dismantled so effortlessly that the enemy didn't even deem them worth the ammunition of a killing blow. "They aren't destroying us," the tactical officer whispered, his voice cracking. They're declawing us." The human flagship, a vessel that dwarfed the fist of Eathras, drifted closer until it occupied the entire view screen. Its hull was scarred by centuries of micrometeorites and old weathered repairs, evidence of a species that had spent 800 years doing nothing but preparing for this exact moment of contact. The comms channel opened one last time, displaying a grainy visual of a woman in a dark utilitarian uniform. She looked tired, her eyes heavy with the weight of 1,000 years of watching a border no one else believed in. "You came here seeking a conquest," she said, her voice echoing through the silent bridge of the flagship. "But you are centuries behind the curve. We spent 800 years in the dark so we would never have to fear the light again. Go back to your spires. Tell the Concordat that the cage is still occupied." With a sudden, violent lurch, the gravitational lock snapped. A single path opened through the wall of Terran ships, a corridor leading directly back toward hegemony space. The rest of Thorn's fleet remained dead in the water, drifting and powerless, their weapon systems melted into slag. "Why?" Thorn whispered, staring at the screen. "Why spare me?" "Because an empire needs a witness," the woman replied, "and you need to understand the price of curiosity. The border remains a cage for the galaxy's safety legate, not ours." The flagship's navigation computer slaved itself to an external signal, and before Thorn could utter another word, the stars stretched into long white lines. The fist of Eathras was kicked back into warp, hurtling away from Sector 0. Thorn slumped into his command chair, the silence of the bridge heavier than any scream. He was going back to the luminous spires, but he wasn't bringing a victory. He was bringing a warning that would echo for the next 1,000 years. Humanity wasn't hiding from the monsters of the galaxy. They were the reason the monsters stayed in the dark.